The galaxy had grown accustomed to human presence, but never to their defiance. Among the stars, where treaties and fragile pacts tried to hold empires together, humanity was tolerated more than welcomed, respected more than trusted. The Drothar, reptilian giants who measured honor in conquest and cruelty, had once fought humanity to a stalemate. Since then, an uneasy peace lingered between them, held not by trust, but by the knowledge that humanity would rather burn than kneel. Captain Marcus Hale had always lived in the shadow of that truth. He had risen from the ashes of skirmishes that claimed better men, his career a catalogue of near-fatal engagements and narrow victories. The years had hardened him, leaving behind a man who carried strategy like a second skin, his thoughts sharp and merciless as the weapons he commanded. Where others saw survival, Marcus saw calculation, cold numbers that determined who lived and who was sacrificed. Commander Elias Vorn balanced him, though not without strain. Elias was a soldier of reason, a man who believed in the veneer of diplomacy even when he knew it cracked easily under pressure. He spoke in measured tones, weighing consequences before choosing a side. Many whispered that Vorn had too much patience for enemies, that his loyalty to peace blinded him, but Marcus knew better. Vorn's patience was not weakness. It was the discipline of a man who had seen enough violence to understand what it cost. Sergeant Raul Draven was of a different breed entirely. If Marcus was the tactician and Vorn the mediator, Raul was the embodiment of humanity's raw, unyielding defiance. Scarred from battles where survival had been a coin toss, he carried himself with the certainty that he would always fight harder, bleed longer, and outlast whatever nightmare came from the dark. To his men, he was not a hero. They had no patience for myths, but he was a brother, and in war, that was worth more than legend. Together they had found themselves at the border of Drothar space, caught in another of the endless frontier clashes that flared like sparks in dry grass. Rumors had reached them of captured soldiers, taken alive after a skirmish near the Black Rift. Marcus wanted them back, Vorn wanted proof, and Raul only wanted to know how many aliens he could kill in the process. They had waited for weeks, hoping the Drothar would respond to coded transmissions requesting a prisoner exchange. Instead, silence lingered like a storm on the horizon. It was Marcus who intercepted the broadcast first. His crew scrambled to cut the signal, but it was too late. The images had already spread across the ship. Human soldiers, bound and stripped, displayed as broken husks against jagged alien structures. Some hung lifeless, pierced through by cruel iron spikes. Others had been left to rot in open air, their corpses trophies rather than casualties. The Drothar had not simply killed them, they had desecrated them. Raul had been in the barracks when the broadcast reached him. Men who had once held stoic silence erupted in fury, smashing fists into bulkheads and tearing at the nearest objects in blind rage. Raul stood among them, face pale but eyes blazing. "They think we're prey," he growled, his voice like gravel dragged across steel. "They think chains can break us. But we're not prey, we're predators. We'll show them." His words were not a speech, but they spread like fire, igniting every man who heard them. Elias Vorn said little when he saw the images. He simply shut his eyes, jaw clenched, breath steady, as though holding back the weight of what he knew was coming. "There will be no diplomacy after this," he murmured to Marcus. "They've written the end of it." Marcus, standing rigid, his gaze fixed on the final frame of the broadcast, did not argue. "Then we'll write the answer." His voice carried no heat, only certainty. On Earth, the fury was immediate. The broadcast reached the colonies within hours, stirring riots of rage and grief. Mothers screamed at the steps of the parliament, demanding vengeance for their sons. Workers abandoned their shifts in the orbital yards to scrawl blood-red messages across steel. No mercy. No forgiveness. In the great halls of high command, silence reigned for only a moment before the storm broke. Generals slammed fists against tables, admirals barked for mobilization, and the civilian council, usually hesitant, found itself swept up in the roar of the people. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would answer not with words, but with war. Marcus received the message at dawn, standing alone in the observation deck of his ship as the pale glow of a dying star washed over him. The order was short, brutal, and final. Prepare for unrestricted war. He let the words settle, his reflection staring back at him with hollow calm. Somewhere behind him, Elias Vorn's measured voice echoed, urging restraint, warning of the abyss they were about to step into. But Marcus knew, as every soldier now knew, that the abyss had already opened the moment the first human was butchered in chains. The deck doors slid open, and Raul entered, shoulders squared, eyes burning. He didn't need to ask, he had already guessed. "So it's war," he said. Marcus finally turned, his gaze hard as iron. "It's war." And in that moment, beneath the cold silence of the stars, humanity crossed a line it could never return from. The predators of Earth had been unleashed, and the galaxy would soon learn the cost of spilling human blood. The chamber of high command thrummed with urgency, every surface vibrating with the voices of men determined to answer violence with fire. Walls lined with holographic star maps glowed red with markers of contested systems, each one a reminder of the frontier lives already lost. At the center stood Marcus Hale, no longer just a captain but now fleet marshal, elevated not by ambition but by necessity. His presence commanded attention without flourish, his words were few, his strategies sharp. The council had chosen him because he embodied what humanity had become, unyielding, calculating, and prepared to wage war without hesitation. At his side remained Elias Vorn, still committed to his role as a voice of measured reason. Though promoted to chief military advisor and political liaison, his duties had become heavier, his shoulders bent under the dual weight of war and conscience. He moved carefully through the council chamber, his expression carved from stone, his voice steady even as tempers boiled. He knew men like Marcus were needed in times of total war, but he also knew what such men could become if no one restrained them. Raul Draven, stripped of ceremony and title, needed no promotion to prove his worth. When war was declared, he volunteered for the vanguard without hesitation, his decision unflinching. He was assigned to the Iron Wolves, an elite strike regiment forged for the sole purpose of storming alien strongholds. Among the recruits, many young and untested, Raul's name carried the weight of a survivor. Men listened when he spoke, not because his words were polished, but because he spoke with the certainty of a man who had stared into the abyss and refused to fall. The mobilization that followed was not slow, nor hesitant. It was immediate and overwhelming. Entire orbital cities converted their foundries to churn out warships. Civilian freighters were stripped down and refitted with rail cannons and missile pods, their crews retrained overnight to become soldiers of the void. On Mars, colossal assembly yards glowed red against the dust storms, birthing dreadnoughts that rose like steel leviathans. The colonies, once fractured by distance and pride, were united now by a single, unshakable purpose: vengeance. Marcus oversaw the fleets with a cold precision that unnerved even his allies. Every ship was placed where it would matter most, every resource stripped from civilian comfort to fuel the growing armada. His orders came without hesitation, his eyes always fixed on the wider board. For Marcus, the war was not merely retaliation, it was survival, and survival allowed no sentiment. Elias Vorn, however, fought battles of another kind. He argued constantly in council meetings, pressing that humanity must distinguish itself from the monsters it now fought. "If we descend into their brutality," he warned, his voice echoing across the chamber, "then we will not have defended humanity. We will have lost it." But the room was filled with men whose sons, fathers, and brothers had been slaughtered. Their faces hardened, their voices demanding retribution, and Vorn's words were often drowned out by the thunder of rage. Still, he refused silence. His role was not to comfort, but to remind them of the cost. Raul, far from the halls of debate, shaped his own battlefield. He drilled recruits until they collapsed, then forced them back onto their feet, teaching them that pain was only weakness trying to cling to life. He fought beside them in brutal sparring matches, his body scarred anew with each day of training. "The Drothar don't fight with mercy," he told them, his voice hoarse yet steady. "So neither can you. But remember, when you fight for the man beside you. That's what makes us human. That's why we win." The men did not cheer. They simply nodded, steel in their eyes, their resolve forged in silence rather than noise. When the time came to decide how humanity would strike, Marcus and Elias clashed openly. In the dim light of the strategy chamber, stars drifted in holographic suspension as the two men circled them with their words. Marcus demanded an overwhelming offensive, multiple fleets hammering alien outposts simultaneously, giving the Drothar no time to regroup. He believed terror was as much a weapon as plasma fire, and humanity needed to remind the galaxy of its savagery. Elias countered with cold determination. He argued for precision, surgical strikes against military targets, not wholesale destruction. "If we slaughter indiscriminately," he told Marcus, his voice sharp, "we become executioners, not soldiers. And the galaxy will see us no differently than the Drothar." For a moment, silence filled the chamber, the tension crackling like static. Marcus's eyes narrowed, his jaw set, but he did not raise his voice. "Elias, this is not about appearances. This is about ensuring humanity never again kneels at the feet of any empire. If fear wins the war quicker, then fear is the strategy." The two men locked eyes, their philosophies clashing more fiercely than any fleet. In the end, compromise was reached not through agreement but through necessity. Marcus's offensive strategy was chosen, but with Vorn's demand that non-combatant targets remain untouched for now. It was a fragile balance, one that strained both men but kept their unity intact long enough to launch the first strike. The fleets departed from Seoul amidst silence, not celebration. No parades marked their departure. No banners waved. Men boarded their ships with grim determination, each knowing they were leaving not for glory, but for vengeance that might consume them. Raul stood at the helm of his regiment's transport, his men arrayed around him, eyes forward, hands steady. "Remember the chains," he told them before they entered cryosleep. "Remember the corpses. When you wake, the first thing you see will be their world burning." From the observation deck of his flagship, Marcus watched Earth shrink into a pale blue sphere, fading into the endless black. His face betrayed nothing, but inside him, a single truth beat like a war drum. There was no turning back. Humanity had chosen its path, and he was the one who would ensure it was carved into the stars. Elias stood beside him, silent, the weight of his conscience pressing heavier with every light year. He had chosen to remain at Marcus's side, not because he agreed, but because he knew the man too well. Left unchecked, Marcus would wield humanity's fury like a blade with no sheath. Elias's presence was not only duty, it was the last barrier between vengeance and annihilation. The stars ahead shimmered like 1,000 watchful eyes, silent witnesses to mankind's fury. And as the fleet slipped into the void, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the predators of Earth to strike. The first strike began in silence, as though the galaxy itself waited to see whether humanity's rage could truly bend the stars. Marcus Hale's fleets emerged from slipspace on the edge of a Drothar stronghold, their formation tight, their weapons primed. He had calculated every trajectory, every maneuver, with the cold precision of a man who could not afford error. On the tactical display, alien defenses flared red across the void, massive fortresses bristling with weapons. To Marcus, they were not fortresses at all, only targets waiting to be dismantled. The order he gave was simple, his voice calm over the comms. Engage. What followed was fury made manifest. Human warships accelerated on attack vectors, rail cannons thundering, missiles streaking across black space like firebrands hurled by gods. The Drothar responded with brutal force, unleashing plasma storms and swarms of automated fighters. Explosions bloomed like flowers of death across the void, but Marcus's fleets did not falter. He had anticipated the alien countermeasures, feints woven into his strategy, traps hidden in the mathematics of war. While the enemy concentrated fire on decoys, The true human assault drove deep into their defenses, ripping holes where none should have existed. On the ground below, Raul Draven led his regiment through the choking dust of a fortress world. The Drothar had built their citadels from black stone and steel, jagged towers designed to intimidate as much as defend. To Raul, they were nothing more than walls waiting to fall. His men advanced under withering fire, alien war machines unleashing streams of molten death, but the iron wolves pressed forward. Raul's voice carried above the chaos, rough and commanding. "Keep moving. Don't give them time to breathe." His men obeyed, their formation breaking through choke points with brutal efficiency. They fought not as machines of discipline, but as predators in a pack, each watching the other, each driven by the memory of the mutilated prisoners. Raul himself was at the front, his rifle spitting fire, his blade drawn whenever the enemy came too close. He fought with a ferocity that seemed unending, his rage poured into every strike. The fortress corridors ran red, and with every fallen Drothar, Raul's men shouted not in triumph, but in grim defiance. The battle raged for hours, space and ground mirroring one another in unrelenting violence. Marcus stood at the center of it all, his flagship weaving through firestorms, his mind orchestrating the destruction like a conductor of death. Yet even in the heart of victory, Elias Vorn's voice remained in his ear. Elias had stayed aboard the command deck, refusing to leave Marcus unchecked, and now he watched the unfolding massacre with growing unease. "This is not a battle, Marcus," he said, his tone low but sharp. "It's an execution." Marcus did not look up from the display. His eyes tracked enemy losses, his lips moving only enough to issue orders. "They executed our men first. We are answering in kind." "That answer will echo," Elias warned. "And when it does, we may find ourselves feared, not respected. Is that the legacy you want for humanity?" For a moment, Marcus's hand paused above the console. Then he pressed another sequence of commands, sending an entire carrier wing plunging into the heart of the alien fleet. "Fear," he said flatly, "is survival." Meanwhile, Raul's advance reached its zenith. His unit stormed the central command spire, a brutal melee breaking out in the alien throne chamber. The Drothar commanders fought like cornered beasts, their massive forms crashing through walls, claws and blades flashing. Raul met them head-on, his body battered, blood running down his arm, but his will unbroken. When one alien chieftain towered above him, roaring in defiance, Raul lunged forward with a guttural shout, driving his blade deep into the creature's throat. The room fell silent as the alien collapsed, and Raul, chest heaving, raised the human flag torn from his pack. He jammed it into the shattered floor, the fabric unfurling in the smoke and fire. His men gathered around, their eyes hollow but burning with pride. "This is only the beginning," Raul said, his voice ragged yet steady. The words spread through the comms, carried from soldier to soldier until the entire battlefield echoed with them. But victory carried a price. Reports filtered back to the flagship. Colonies struck in retaliation, millions dead under alien bioweapons released in desperate vengeance. Entire cities reduced to graveyards of silence. Elias felt the weight of those losses like stones pressed against his chest, his warning words swallowed by the roar of war. He turned to Marcus, his voice sharp with pain. "Every step forward leaves ashes behind. How many will be enough for you?" Marcus's gaze never wavered from the display, though his jaw tightened, the faintest crack in his mask of calm. "Enough," he said, "is when no Drothar remains to harm us." The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Raul's triumph on the ground, the fleet's crushing victory in orbit, the desperate retaliation across human colonies, all of it folded into a single, undeniable truth. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. It was fighting for dominance, and the cost would be measured in galaxies of blood. When the fortress world finally burned, its skies lit by human bombardment, Marcus gave the order to withdraw. The fleet reassembled, scarred but unbroken, and turned its gaze toward the next target. Raul's regiment, reduced by nearly a third, stood battered but unyielding. They did not speak of the dead. They carried them forward in silence, each step heavier, each heart harder. Elias Vorn lingered on the observation deck, watching the flames consume what had once been a city. He pressed a hand against the glass, his reflection caught between the fire and the void. For the first time, he wondered whether the true enemy had been defeated, or whether it was slowly being born within their own ranks. Marcus joined him, his voice steady, almost detached. "We've taken their first world. Others will follow. Soon their empire will collapse." Elias turned, eyes narrowed. "And when it does, what will remain of us?" Marcus met his gaze, without flinching. "Survivors." The word hung in the silence, cold and final. As the fleet slipped into the black, the stars themselves seemed to recoil, as though they sensed what had been unleashed. Humanity's vengeance had only begun, and the galaxy would not soon forget the wrath of men who refused to die in chains. The campaign to break the Drothar reached its climax with a name whispered across every fleet: Operation Iron Wrath. Marcus Hale stood at its heart, a commander not of nations, but of an entire species united in fury. Star maps stretched before him, glowing red with enemy systems that had already fallen. Each victory brought humanity closer to the alien capital, and each left Elias Vorn more unsettled. What had begun as retaliation had become a relentless storm, and Marcus steered it with the certainty of a man who no longer questioned his path. The fleets surged forward like predators in coordinated packs. Dreadnoughts burned through enemy lines, carriers unleashed swarms of fighters, and orbital cannons cracked open fortresses that had stood for centuries. The Drothar fought back with desperation, their fleets massive but disorganized, their war machines ferocious but fractured. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they bled system by system, unable to stop the tide. Marcus gave no quarter, no pause. "Push forward," he ordered after each victory, his tone devoid of triumph. To him, there was no victory until the Drothar were ashes. Raul Draven and the Iron Wolves were thrust into the bloodiest crucibles of the campaign. With every world they stormed, Raul led from the front, his body a map of scars, his will unbroken. He no longer spoke of vengeance, his men needed no reminder. They fought with the silent fury of survivors who had already buried too many brothers. On the streets of Carthuan, the second-largest Drothar city, Raul's regiment tore through alien defenses in brutal street-to-street combat. When an armored behemoth burst from the ruins, Raul charged it head-on, planting explosives at its joints and detonating them even as shrapnel tore into his side. He rose bleeding, half carried by his men, and forced them forward with a single command: "Finish it." News of the atrocities committed by the Drothar spread with every conquest. Labor camps uncovered, mass graves unearthed, human remains displayed as trophies. For the soldiers, these discoveries were fuel, hardening their resolve into something unshakable. For Elias, they were a torment. He saw the horror in the enemy's crimes, but he also saw the danger in how easily men justified their own brutality by pointing at the past. He confronted Marcus in the quiet hours aboard the flagship, his voice sharp with urgency. "You have them broken," Elias said. "Their empire is crumbling. End it here. Negotiate their surrender." Marcus's gaze was like iron, his expression immovable. "Surrender is a word for those who can be trusted to honor it. They butchered our people in chains. Do you expect me to gamble the lives of every colony on the promise of mercy?" Elias's jaw tightened, frustration carved into his features. "If we exterminate them, Marcus, then we've crossed a line we can never step back from. We'll become the very monsters we claim to hate." Marcus turned back to the star map, his voice low but unyielding. "If humanity must become monsters to survive, then monsters we will be." The final strike came at the Drothar capital, a world encircled by orbital fortresses and fleets drawn from every corner of their empire. The battle was apocalyptic. Human ships hurled themselves into the firestorm, formations breaking and reforming in deadly precision under Marcus's direction. Space itself seemed to ignite, 1,000 suns bursting and dying in the clash of fleets. On the surface, Raul and his wolves fought through the alien heartland, every step forward soaked in blood. The capital city became a furnace of smoke and fire, towers collapsing, the ground shaking beneath the fury unleashed upon it. In the heart of the city, Raul made his last stand. Mortally wounded, his armor shattered, he refused evacuation. Surrounded by a knot of iron wolves, he dragged himself into the alien command nexus where the last Drothar generals gathered. With the last of his strength, he triggered the explosives strapped across his chest, tearing the command structure apart in a blast that shook the city. His men carried his memory forward, their voices hoarse with grief, but their resolve only deepened. Raul Draven died as he had lived, at the front, unyielding, refusing to give ground. When word of Raul's sacrifice reached Marcus, his face did not change. He simply gave the order that would end the war: orbital firestorms. Human warships unleashed their fury, raining destruction upon the capital until nothing remained but burning ruin. Towers fell, oceans boiled, and the once proud homeworld of the Drothar was reduced to silence. The empire that had once mocked humanity with trophies of its dead was gone, its ashes scattered across the stars. But the silence that followed was not relief. It was heavier, darker, filled with questions that could not be spoken aloud. Elias stood beside Marcus on the observation deck, watching the flames consume an entire civilization. His voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than any blade. "We've won the war, Marcus. But what have we made of ourselves?" Marcus did not answer immediately. His eyes lingered on the dying world, its fires reflected in the glass before him. At last he spoke, his tone calm, almost hollow. "Survivors." The word was final, but it did not ease the weight in Elias's chest. He turned away, haunted by the knowledge that survival had been bought at a cost no man could ever repay. The fleets stood victorious, but the men within them had changed. They were no longer soldiers defending their people. They were predators who had tasted the power of annihilation, and the galaxy would tremble at the shadow they now cast. Beyond the ruins of the Drothar, other empires watched in silence. Some in fear, some in awe, all in recognition of what humanity had become. The chain had been broken, the humiliation avenged, but a new question spread across the stars, whispered in the corners of distant worlds. If this is what humans do to their enemies, what will they do to anyone who dares stand in their way? The war was over, but the story was not. Humanity had claimed its place as a predator among predators, and the galaxy would never look at them the same again.